Hi you guys, and welcome back to another makeup and true crime video. I hope you guys are having an amazing day, week, month, whatever it is. If you're new here, my name is Zara and I post a new true crime video every single week. So if you love these videos, go ahead and leave a comment down below telling me what you want to see next. And make sure to hit that subscribe button so you guys never miss another video, and it would really mean so much to me. I literally feel like I haven't had my real voice in weeks because my son makes us sick every other week. Like, we recover and then we get sick again. So that's just the life with a toddler. So today's case is about the Pan family, and in particular Jennifer Pan. And I heard about this case about 3 to 4 years ago. And when I heard of it, it really blew my mind. The details of this case are so bizarre, but they're almost genius. And in a way, I feel like I can relate to this story because it deals with and discusses tiger parents. Now, if you don't know what tiger parents are, lucky you. But tiger parenting is basically a form of strict parenting where the parents are really highly invested in their children's success and their life. And this goes, for both academically and financially. Specifically, tiger parents push their children to attain high levels of academic achievement or success in high status extracurricular activities, such as, music or sports. And although many cultures, have parenting styles like this, tiger parenting is mainly referring to strict parenting styles common in households in East Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. And I can definitely relate. I grew up with strict parents, and I know they weren't tiger parents, but my parents definitely pushed us to be the best academically. And my siblings and I are all lawyers, so they kind of won that battle. The Pan family, however, they were a Vietnamese immigrant family, and they lived in Markham, Ontario, Canada. And Jennifer was born on 17th June 1986 to Bic and Han Pan, who were her parents, and she had a younger brother named Felix, who was born in 1989. Han and Bic both worked at Magna International, which was an auto parts manufacturer in Ontario. Han worked as a tool and die maker, and Bic, her mother, worked making car parts. And Bic and Han, they worked extremely hard for their money, and this was to make sure they could raise their children with a life and with opportunities that they themselves missed out on. By 2004, they were eventually financially stable enough to purchase a home for themselves, and they bought a really large home with a 2-car garage for their family in a nice residential neighborhood. And by that time, they also had saved up $200,000 in savings in their bank accounts. Bic, she drove a Lexus, and Han, he drove a Mercedes. So they were doing, really well for themselves considering how much they worked and how much they sort of struggled to build this life for themselves. That's the Asian way, man. You come here with nothing and you make a life for yourself. And like I mentioned before, Bic and Han, they were considered tiger parents because they were extremely strict with their kids and they wanted the very best for their children. And the negative connotation with being a tiger parent, especially in this case, was that they wanted the best for their children, not only academically, but also in extracurricular activities. They set many goals, for their children, and they had extremely high expectations of them both. Jennifer was made to take piano classes at the age of just 4, and she was also made to take figure skating classes, where she actually trained most days of the week. Jennifer did really well at both of these activities. She had a bunch of trophies and awards. They even had hopes of Jennifer becoming an Olympic figure skater, but she tore a ligament in her knee when she was 14, and she was told that she could no longer compete in figure skating. Jennifer attended the Mary Ward Catholic Secondary School, where she played the flute in her school band. And according to her friends, especially one friend named Karen, Han was seen as the classic tiger dad, and Bic, her mother, was like his reluctant accomplice. Han and Bic would pick up Jennifer from school every single day, and then they would also monitor her extracurricular activities. So when she went to play the flute or the piano, they just monitored basically her every movement. So this was Jennifer's routine. She woke up, went to school. After school, she would go to practice till 10 p.m. at night, come home, do homework till midnight, go to sleep, and then start that routine all over again. That is a lot. Like a lot. That's a lot for a teenager. I thought my parents were hella strict with academics, but once I got home, like I was home. I would be exhausted if that was my life in high school. Jennifer was not allowed to date in high school, and she wasn't even allowed to attend high school dances because Han was fearful that these activities would distract her from her academic goals. And it is said that Han was the primary rule maker of the household. He's the one that stopped Jennifer from having any type of social life. She had to go to school, keep up with her schedule, and work hard to prepare for her future. Her mother, Bic, was just going along with what Han wanted to keep the peace at home. What peace? Like, how was that? Anyway. But let's be real, you're only young once, so this must have been really hard for Jennifer. And they don't say much about what Felix's life and routine was like. I'm guessing it would have been the same. So Jennifer did what her parents wanted. She kept up with her schedule. She had tons of trophies, medals, straight A's in all her classes, up until she hit the 8th grade when perhaps it became too much for her. She expected to be named valedictorian during her 8th grade graduation. But during the ceremony, Jennifer's achievements weren't even acknowledged. And she was like, what the fuck? What am I doing all this for? No recognition, no acknowledgement. She was like, I'm just doing all this work and killing myself for what? And I get that. I mean, if she wasn't doing all this hard work for herself, she was doing it, for her parents to be recognized by the school and to have nothing come from straight A's and trophies and stuff. It's kind of like, well, the heck? So then when she entered 9th grade, she dropped all her A's and she began getting C's for most of her classes. And, to a tiger parent, that's like an F. So I'm guessing after her disappointment from her 8th grade graduation, she was like, whatever, I'm not going to work so hard for nothing. She probably didn't see the value in putting in all this effort and doing all this work just because it was expected of her, not because she truly wanted it. But keep in mind, this was expected of her. She was expected to get straight A's in all of her classes. And she had a standard of excellence she had to upkeep for her parents. So this was when Jennifer's deception began. She decided she was going to keep her parents happy, not by doing all this work and putting in the effort to get good grades, but by faking her results. And this is where I think it gets super interesting. She began rigging all of her school reports and changing all her C's to A's. In her mind, she thought, you know what, I'm just going to take a break in grades 9 and 10 because universities don't even check these grades anyway. And when I reach grade 11 and 12, I'll just pick back up where I left off, put the effort back in, and go back to getting straight A's again. And honestly, this is low-key genius because when I would get bad grades, I would just hide it and hope my parents would never ask for the report. But Jennifer, no. She would take her school report cards. She would cut out the letter A from fonts that match the school report font, glue them over top the C grades, and then photocopy the whole document to produce a whole separate report card that looked legit. And then she would show that whole new report card with all the straight A's to her parents. Genius. Why didn't I ever think of that? Well, because I'm not a psychopath. So Jennifer kept this up for the next couple of years. And then when she was in the 11th grade, she met the love of her life, Daniel. She met him during a music class that they both had to attend in Europe. And during the competition in Europe, they were in a school hall. And during the competition, all the patrons inside the hall were smoking. And the entire hall was filled with smoke. So Jennifer started panicking and she couldn't breathe. So she runs out of the hall to catch her breath. And she says she almost blacked out, but Daniel came to save her. He ran after her and he coached her in breathing techniques. And he helped her calm down. And she was like, this is the right guy for me. She states that he pretty much saved her life that night. Okay, but let's back it up. What type of school event is this that takes place in the 2000s where everybody be secondhand smoking? There are children and we're secondhand smoking and firsthand smoking. How are the kids supposed to be playing the flute with the room filled with smoke? They're playing musical instruments with their breaths, but they can't catch their breaths. Anyway, so after this, Daniel and Jennifer began dating, and obviously having a boyfriend, her parents were right. Her grades kept dropping, but she continued at this point to falsify her report cards, create those fake ones. And that's 3 years of doing this. So she was pretty much a pro at it. Then towards the end of high school, Jennifer received early acceptance into a university. And I don't really know how that worked because if she was getting such bad grades, why did she get early acceptance? But apparently she did. But following this acceptance letter, she ended up failing her calculus class. So that university ended up retracting that offer. But obviously freaking out about what her parents would think, she kept up this lie and told her parents, I got accepted into this university and I'll be completing my studies over there. And then her parents wanted to know, what her next steps were. Jennifer told them, after I complete, a course at this university, I'm going to go and transfer to the University of Toronto and I will complete their pharmacology program at that university and then, go from there. Bick and Han obviously believed her. They had no reason not to. And they were super proud that their daughter, was on her way to a noble medical career. But one thing that really doesn't make sense that they never explain is that if Jennifer's grades suddenly started dropping in high school and she was falsifying her reports, an A student going to C's and F's, wouldn't the school be more involved in speaking with her parents and finding out what was going on with Jennifer, why she was sort of dropping her grades? Like, I know that would have happened in my school because I used to get really good grades in some classes, and then if they dropped, they would go and contact my parents directly. So I don't know if that's like an Australian thing, but definitely seems strange that the school wasn't involved. So at this point, Jennifer's grades were so bad that she wasn't even entitled to graduate high school. So that's what I mean. Like, wouldn't the school be involved in this? But I guess they weren't. So no problem for Jennifer. I mean, she just ended up faking her high school diploma. She clearly was a pro at this point. Her parents thought she was graduating high school, and when it came time to the graduation ceremony, she ended up telling her parents, you know what, they only gave us one ticket and I didn't want either of you to miss out, so I just gave the ticket to my friend. And I just won't attend the ceremony. There's no point. I'll just get my diploma sent to me in the mail. And again, I think at this point her parents, didn't think anything of it. They thought there's no reason not to believe her, so they just did. So now at this point, Jennifer is attending university. No, she's not. She's lying. Because she faked acceptance letters. She went and bought secondhand books required for her degree. And she even told her parents she got a $3,000 scholarship, for being the amazing student she was. So as you can imagine, these lies are going on for how many years now? Like 4 years at this point. And it's like probably snowballed so much that she doesn't know how to stop it. It's just like going and going and going and going. So Jennifer pretended to attend Ryerson University for 2 years. She pretended 2 years. But obviously we all know that she wasn't at university. So instead, she spent her time sitting in cafes. She even taught as a piano instructor, and she worked in a restaurant part-time to earn money. And in order to maintain the charade, she told her parents that she won scholarships. And then later she ended up faking an acceptance letter into the University of Toronto and said she accepted an offer into their pharmacology program. She went to the extent of, purchasing secondhand books. She watched videos relating to pharmacology so that she could go ahead and write in a notebook, notes that she would take from those videos to show that she was attending classes and taking notes during these classes. And she would show her parents these notes, like, look what I'm studying. She would attend public libraries and sit there for hours researching her course and making false notes. Like, her deceit was actually so responsible. She was using her time not partying, not drinking, not wasting a lot of time. She was actually making notes, trying to show her parents what a good student was. I mean, at this point, girl, you should have just gone back to high school, finished it up, got your diploma, and then applied to a university, because this is so much work. You might as well have just done this. So even during this point, even though she was hitting all the right goals and, satisfying her parents' wishes, still wasn't allowed to attend any parties during the time her parents thought she was at university. At the age of 22, she had never gone to a club, never been drunk, visited a friend's house, or gone on vacation without her family. Jennifer and her friends regarded this upbringing as restrictive and greatly oppressive. Han, on the other hand, believed that none of these activities were productive and therefore unnecessary. Who else is gaining a ton of weight during COVID? Because we are in lockdown yet again and I can't go to the gym. Okay, so let's just help myself out a little bit with extra contouring. Now, I don't believe that Jennifer's parents were trying to make her life hell. I don't believe they were trying to cause suffering in her life. But in all honesty, they kind of were. Restricting your children to the point where they have no life, no experiences, no mistakes, they can't make any decisions of their own. It's bound to affect them, right? So now, after 2 years of attending university, Jennifer goes to her parents and she says, you know what? Taking public transport to university is becoming so difficult. It's really time consuming, so I'm just gonna go and move in with my friend Topaz. It would just be way easier on me and save me so much time. I'm gonna live with her 3 days out of the week, Monday to Wednesday, and then it was just gonna make travel to and from university so much easier. Her mom, Bic, was like, oh yeah, makes sense. You've been doing this for a couple of years now. So she convinces her husband, Han, that Jennifer moving in with her friend Topaz just makes sense. It's better for Jennifer and her, travel. But when I Googled it, it was only like a 25-minute drive from Jennifer's home to university. So I'm like, public transport probably would have only been an hour. So I don't know. There's no way my dad would have let me move in with someone during the week at that age for an hour commute, So from Monday to Wednesday, Jennifer lived with her friend Topaz in Toronto. No, she didn't, because she was a line-ass B and she was living with her boyfriend Daniel the entire time. She never ever even lived with her friend Topaz. And Jennifer ended up lying to Daniel's parents as well, telling them her parents were okay with Jennifer staying with them for those 3 days of the week. And she kept brushing off their attempts to meet her parents as well. For this entire time, it's like years at this point, her parents didn't even know that Daniel existed, that her daughter was dating someone, let alone living with him 3 days of the week. So Daniel was mixed race. He was Chinese and Filipino, and he lived in Ajax, which is like the opposite direction of Toronto. And he worked at a Boston pizza restaurant. So Daniel went to school with Jennifer, and then he transferred to the Cardinal Carter Academy in North York, and this was due to low grades, and he later studied at York University, and he was an active drug dealer. Okay, Jennifer. So Jennifer is living it up with her bad boy, Daniel, reveling in her lies. I'm never gonna get caught. I'm gonna figure it all out. But eventually, Jennifer's lies begin to crumble. Like they always do, guys. Lies never, ever, ever last, long. Well, this was pretty long. So while she was supposedly studying at the University of Toronto, Jennifer told her parents that she was volunteering at a blood testing lab called Sick Kids, and that the gig sometimes required late night shifts on Fridays and the weekend. And Jennifer suggested, you know what, guys, I should spend more of the week at Topaz's house, because she was probably realizing, you know what, I'm there Monday to Wednesday. She probably thought, you know what, let me start them off slow. Let me tell them Monday to Wednesday so they don't get suspicious that I'm trying to party it up on the weekends. And then she was like, you know what, I want to party it up on the weekends. So she's like, you guys, I need to live there a little bit longer, because these shifts, these work shifts, I'll be working really late on weekends, But Han, he was now starting to pick up that, hold on, you have no uniform or even like a key card for work at Sick Kids at the lab. You would need a pass. So one day he insisted that they drop her off at the hospital for her shift, And as soon as the car pulled to a stop, Jennifer runs inside the hospital, like, bye, gotta go, see ya, don't follow me. But Han instructed Bic to go inside and follow her. Realizing that she was being tailed by her mom, Jennifer ran into the ER and she hid inside the waiting room for a few hours until they left. And I'm like, is that accurate? Was Bic really looking for her for a few hours? But either way, she went and hid from her mother in the hospital. And I guess they never tried to contact her after that. But early the next morning, her parents end up calling her friend Topaz. And they're like, oh, where's Jennifer? Like, what time did she come home last night? And Topaz was like, Jennifer? Why would Jennifer be living with me? She doesn't live with me. Stupid. I mean, okay, look, you kept up lies for so long, and then you didn't go and tell your friend Topaz to back you up and be like, yeah, Jennifer's coming back. Like, she's taking a shower. You know what I mean? If you're gonna lie, at least back up your lies. Topaz wasn't a very good friend. No, I'm kidding. So when Jennifer finally comes home, Han confronts her. Jennifer breaks down. She confesses she never worked or volunteered for Sick Kids, and she had never been at the university's pharmacology program, and she had been living at Daniel's house this entire time. Though she neglected to tell them that she never graduated high school either, and that her time at the previous university was also complete bullcrap. Bic was so upset. She was crying, and Han, her father, was just furious. He told Jennifer, get the hell out, never ever come back. But Bic convinced him to let Jennifer stay and make up for what she had done. They took away her cell phone and her laptop for 2 weeks, after which she was only allowed to use them both in her parents' presence, and she had to endure surprise checks on her phone for text messages. They forbade her from seeing Daniel, and they ordered her to quit all her jobs except for teaching piano, and they began tracking her every movement. They even tracked the mileage on her car to see that where she was going was really where she was going. I mean, she was 24 years old at this time, and they said even more boundaries for her. So during this time and after all these years, Daniel ended up getting sick of all the secrets and the lies. He was like, it's been years and you're always creeping around and everything is a lie. And I can relate, like when you have to lie to your parents, you just end up telling more and more and more lies until like one lie covers the other lie, and it just ends up becoming a massive full-blown secret life because there's no truth left to it. So Daniel broke up with Jennifer. And let's keep in mind that Daniel was actually helping her as well during all these years to lie and to make up all these false stories. So he was like, I'm sick of the life of lies that I created with you and I helped you create. Jennifer was obviously devastated. I mean, Daniel was her soulmate, right? Then Jennifer finds out, wait a second, Daniel was actually dating someone else, a girl named Christine, and Jennifer was like, oh, hell no. So she goes to Daniel and tells him, one day when I was at home, a man dressed up as a police officer comes to the door knocking. So I opened it up thinking it was a police officer and he had something to tell me. But as soon as I did that, a group of men rushed in and raped me in my home, and they just left me there. A few days later, she says she receives a bullet in an envelope from those same men, implying that the bullet was a threat to kill Jennifer. She tells Daniel, this has to be Christine, your new girlfriend's doing. She has it out for me. You must break up with her. Jennifer is insane. Like at this point, her life has no truth. There's no truth to anything she's saying, any stories, there's no truth. And you know what? She doesn't know how to be truthful. She's been living this false life for how many years at this point? Like years. So Jennifer ends up reconnecting with an old friend, and as they are discussing their lives and, you know, the issues that they're facing, her friend mentions to her, oh, you know, when I was younger, I hated my parents so much, I wanted to kill my dad. Jennifer, upon hearing this, was like, oh yeah, I can just kill my parents. Duh, and everything will just fall back into place. This girl is 0 to 100 for real. So through this friend, she enlists his roommate to go and kill her parents. Like, hey, let's just do this. Can you go and kill my parents for me? I know you're his roommate, but I mean, I'll just pay you $1,500. And you can go and kill my parents. But obviously this plan fails and we don't really know why, but it fails. So Jennifer ends up going to Daniel and saying, look, I have a plan how to get me out of this mess and it's super easy, no biggie, let's just kill my parents. And even Daniel was like, oh yeah, how did we not think about this? So Daniel introduces Jennifer to his friend Leonard Crawford, and Daniel was like, you can call him Homeboy. So Daniel tells Jennifer that Homeboy can easily take care of Jennifer's plan and he would kill her parents. So Jennifer meets up with Homeboy and they discuss Jennifer's situation, and now they have to come to an agreement on payment. So Homeboy says, you know, usually for these types of hits, I charge $20,000, but because you're a friend of Daniel's, $10,000 for you. That friendship discount though, that's a whole 50% off. So the deal is now done. Now it's time to plan this out to get Jennifer free, right? So Daniel gives Jennifer his old phone basically to act as a burner phone to discuss the plan and the crime so that Jennifer wouldn't be using her personal phone. But Daniel, it's your old phone though. So they all begin texting out the plan. Homeboy begins preparing for his hit, watching the parents' every single move. So they form a little hit team where Eric Sniper Cardi and David Myvalagam, something like that, joined the team. Then comes November 8, 2010, and Jennifer decides that this is going to be the day where I want my new life to begin and I want my parents' life to end. So she spoke to Homeboy and she says, you know what, Homeboy, this is the night. So she went about her usual day that day, and then at night before going to bed at around 8 p.m., her dad was now heading up to bed and her mom was watching TV. She had just returned from dancing salsa that night and she was just watching TV, resting her feet, and Jennifer says goodnight to her dad and then goes downstairs and says goodnight to her mom, and then she goes to the front door and she unlocks it. So now the door to her family home is unlocked and Jennifer was just waiting. David, one of the hitmen, calls Jennifer up at 9:30 p.m. and he asks her, you know, when should everything begin? Jennifer says, I'll give you a signal when I go to my room and I flick my room light on and off. That's when you should strike. So at around 11 p.m. that night, Jennifer gives the signal. The three men burst through the front door of her home, all carrying guns. One takes Bick hostage, one goes upstairs and takes Han hostage and brings him downstairs, and then one of the other men, presumably Homeboy, goes upstairs, grabs Jennifer, and brings her downstairs as well. We don't know where Felix, her brother, is at this point. It's never mentioned where he is, so it's clear he wasn't at home though. At this point, Jennifer's poor parents are freaking out and speaking to each other in Cantonese, like, how did these guys enter the home? Like, the door was locked. How did they get in? What do they want? And they were really worried for Jennifer too, assuming the burglars were trying to rob them and hurt them. So the burglars begin shouting, "Where's the money? Where's the cash? Give me the cash." And they kept calling the parents liars because the parents were like, we don't have anything. And they just kept saying they didn't have anything. Then Han and Bick were pleading to the burglars saying, "Please don't hurt my daughter. I'm begging you." And then the men confirmed, like, yeah, don't worry. We're not going to hurt Jennifer. She's good, but we want the cash. So they then take Bick and Han down to the basement, where each of them were shot multiple times. Bick was shot 3 times in the head and she died instantly. And Han was shot twice, once in the shoulder and once in the face. Han lay on the floor bleeding out. Jennifer was taken upstairs, where she claimed she was tied to the stair banister, and the men ended up taking all the cash in her house, as well as received $2,000 from Jennifer herself before they fled. Jennifer then calls 911 and she's pleading for help, saying, "I don't know what happened," and that she didn't know where her parents were. But shortly into the call, you can hear her father Han moaning and mumbling in the background. So here is the 911 call.
"What's your name?"
My name is Jennifer.
Someone just broke in?
Someone broke in and I heard shots like pops. I don't know what's happening. I'm tied upstairs.
Does it sound like gunshots?
I don't know what gunshot sounds like. I just heard a pop. I'm okay. My dad just went outside screaming.
Do you think your mom is downstairs too?
I don't hear her anymore. Please hurry. I don't know what's happening.
So obviously we're wondering, why did the men kill Bick but not Han? And seems like they were pretty stupid. So they ended up putting like pillowcases or bags over Bick and Han's head, and they ended up shooting them with those coverings still on their faces. So they possibly couldn't see that Han was still alive. And I mean, it's a good thing that he survived the attack, but these men clearly were not professionals. They were pretty stupid. So at this point, when Jennifer's making the 911 call, Han stumbles out of the basement and he climbs up the stairs and he runs out the front door and he's screaming and pleading for help. And a neighbor who was actually getting ready for work actually saw him and was like, what the fuck? So he ended up calling 911 too. An ambulance arrived shortly after and Han was taken to hospital and put into a coma. Jennifer was then, taken in by the police and she was interrogated. And Jennifer's full interviews are available online. And it's insane how calculating and how much of a victim role she takes on. Like, it's really, really scary to watch. She's clearly trying to seek sympathy from the detective, and she looks at him multiple times before actually giving her final answer, like seeking approval from him and seeking approval that her answers are sort of correct before she answers any of his questions. Jennifer states the burglars broke into her home, shot her parents, stole the money that was in the home, and then tied her to the banister before they fled. Jennifer was interviewed twice, once directly after the incident and then once again the next day. The second time Jennifer was interrogated, the detectives just had more questions about how Jennifer made that 911 call if her arms were tied to the banister. Jennifer states that they tied her right arm above the elbow to the banister, and then they also had her wrists bound like this behind her back. She said her phone was apparently in her waistband of her pants. She claimed she made the 911 call by reaching around to her waistband, pulling the phone open, and then like yelling into the phone. That's how she was able to speak with 911. The second time Jennifer is interviewed, the detectives had more questions about how she was able to make that 911 call if her arms were bound together. Jennifer states that her right arm was bound to the banister above her elbow, and then her wrists were bound together like this behind her back. She says that her phone was apparently in her waistband of her pants, and she reached around to the side, pulled the phone from her waistband, and was like yelling into the phone like from an angle. That's how she was able to make the 911 call. So as you can see from the tape, what Jennifer says actually kind of makes sense. And although she showed them that it was possible that she was able to make this call with her hands being bound the way they were bound, it just made her seem really sus, and the police just didn't believe her. They just didn't think that her story was fully believable. 3 days later, her father Han wakes up from his coma. He had multiple injuries, like broken facial bones, and the bullet actually missed a vital artery. He could have died, and he was so lucky, but also unlucky because now he has to live with this trauma and without his wife, you know? At this point, a funeral was held for her mother, Bick, and Jennifer was actually asked to organize this, which she did. And this funeral took place on November 15th, 2010, but sadly, Han could not even attend his own wife's funeral due to how traumatic his injuries were. Not only that, but Han, woke up from his coma with all these intense injuries, but he also remembered everything. Han states that he remembers hearing Jennifer talk to one of the burglars like she knew him. He claims Jennifer's wrists were not tied together the whole time she was being led around the house, and the whole incident almost seemed casual, like Jennifer was not afraid at all. After this, Jennifer is interviewed for the third time. This time, the detectives had just had enough. A brutal crime had taken place, and they just knew that Jennifer had something to do with it. So they spoke to Jennifer, and this interview, oh my god, it drags on and on and on, but maybe it's an interview tactic to get her to tell the truth. The detective was legit making me fall asleep. But after hours, Jennifer finally says, okay, I've had a super tough upbringing. I've been controlled my whole life. I've been unable to do anything in my life. My parents were too strict, so I decided I was going to end my life. I hired these hitmen to come to my house and kill me, but the months prior to this plan taking place, my relationship with my parents had gotten so much better. So I spoke to these hitmen and I decided, you know what? I want to call everything off. But you know what? The lines got crossed. Everything just got jumbled and confused. It was a total miscommunication, you guys. It was a miscommunication. They ended up coming to my house and killing my parents instead of me. It was all a big mistake. So she admits to hiring the killers, but not that they were the targets, that she was actually the target, and it was all a big whoopsie whoops, you know? The detective during the interview actually lied to Jennifer during this third interview and told her that, you know what, we have computer software that will detect any lies given in statements through satellites in the sky. And this apparently is actually allowed in Canada to obtain confessions in interrogations, which is super interesting that you can just lie to people, but okay. So clearly Jennifer's story was bullshit. So Jennifer was arrested on 22nd November 2010. David, Cardi, Sniper, Homeboy, and Daniel were all subsequently arrested the following year in April 2011, and all 5 of them remained in custody until the trial took place. The trial of Jennifer, Daniel, and the 3 hitmen began on March 19th, 2014 in Newmarket, and it continued for around 10 months. All of them pleaded not guilty to the charges of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. At the trial, the police gathered evidence, including tracking of their mobile phones and text messages, including over 100 text messages between Jennifer and Daniel, remember, on Daniel's old phone, idiots, that were actually sent between the two just 6 hours before the shooting. Further evidence was submitted around the unusual nature of the burglary, the robbery, the shooting, and the irregularities in Jennifer's testimony. The prosecution put forth Jennifer's obsession with Daniel, her lack of true emotion and confession regarding the attack. They also recognized the trauma Jennifer underwent dealing with tiger parents. This was all also detailed in the case. And one of the major irregularities was that Jennifer was not blindfolded, assaulted, she wasn't taken to the basement, she wasn't even shot. Therefore, why would any burglars leave behind a witness to the attacks? Which none of this even made sense if it was a real burglary. Also, the fact that there were 2 luxury cars, jewelry, TVs, computers, none of this was even attempted to be stolen. Evidence from Han, which differed greatly from Jennifer's version, was also taken into consideration and completely undermined Jennifer's credibility. The trial included over 200 exhibits, and there were 50 witnesses at the trial. The entire group were all convicted on December 13th, 2014, and each of them received a life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years. Jennifer was sentenced to life with no chance of parole for 25 years for the murder of her mother and the attempted murder of her father, Han. Jennifer's father and brother actually requested a court order that banned her from ever contacting the surviving members of her family ever again. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with Jennifer. And speaking of her brother, how annoying that we don't know what was happening to him during that night or what he feels about what happened, you know? So this court order that Jennifer's brother Felix and her father made against Jennifer, preventing her from ever contacting them, Jennifer actually tried to object to this, but despite the objections from her defense lawyers, the judge filed the order. Jennifer was never to contact them ever again. Jennifer was also banned from ever contacting Daniel ever again. Also, let me mention that when Daniel was interviewed, he threw Jennifer completely under the bus and was like, yeah, for sure she wanted her parents dead. This was all Jennifer's idea. She had been planning this for months, but don't ask me. I have no idea who did this. I wasn't involved. Like, what a rat. So much for true love. Jennifer is now serving his sentence at the Grand Valley Institute for Women in Ontario. This story really made headlines and highlighted the nature of tiger parenting and suggested recognition and consideration of the mental and psychological impacts that tiger parenting may take things too far and may have taken things too far in the Pan household. An article in Toronto Life actually did a story that brought widespread attention to this case, calling it an instance of tiger parenting that just went horribly wrong. So let me know your thoughts on this case down below, guys. It's pretty crazy the extent that Jennifer went to try and like have a normal sort of life, but obviously she did take it a little too far. I hope you found it as interesting as I did, and if you did, go ahead and hit the like button and make sure to subscribe, guys. And if you want to check out some of my other videos, click over here, and I will see you in the next one, guys. Besitos. Mwah. Bye.